Hey you guys, so I was going to ignore this controversy because it has created a great deal of division. And even I had managed to become ensnared with these debates. One takeaway right off that I will say is disturbing is seeing how easy it is to divide the Black community. It doesn't take much effort to split the collective's thoughts towards an event or situation, which really isn't that surprising, considering that we have difficulty being on one accord to begin with. However, I will say that it's interesting how some of our people have taken on a sort of white identity when listening to their points of logic. And I think some of you may feel compelled to come to this video and ask what race has to do with your beliefs, culture, etc. But Black people are much more white adjacent than they know, from their spiritual beliefs to their political alignment. And unfortunately, at this point, I would say that it has become so ingratiated within our psyche that subconsciously we display these qualities without realizing that we're doing it. And if Black people had a working knowledge of psychology on a collective scale, not individual, then it may have the capacity to change our perspective, or at least reconsider the way that we process stimuli in our environment. The importance behind my analysis of this is because with the circumstances that have taken place between Will Smith and Chris Rock has actually revealed to me a generational pathology that warrants an evaluation of how we perceive the phenomenon around us and how we choose to react to our surroundings. Everyone has seen what's transpired by now between Will and Chris, so I don't need to debrief anyone on what's occurred, but I will talk about some of the points that people have made, because it did stir up numerous debates and discussions online about the conduct displayed by them. Some people argue that Will Smith's approach to the situation wasn't the best and that he should have handled it professionally behind closed doors, while the other argument is that Chris Rock should have refrained from telling a joke about Will's wife, Jada, because she deals with a condition known as alopecia. Now, before I really get into this, because there's an article who reveals the true mastermind that was behind this catastrophe, I feel like what I discussed just a few seconds ago applies to Black people's response to the Oscars. Black people's concerns were for Chris and Will because they felt as though it was unprofessional for Black people to behave in such a manner in the presence of the larger society. If we are to apply what I said earlier during my analysis of our behavior, then Black people subconsciously are displaying morals and beliefs bestowed upon them by the larger society. And let me explain to you why that is. First off, we are not the most barbaric or even savage people on this planet, considering we have no real power to impact anything on a larger hierarchy. We don't go out waging wars against other countries because we can't have our way. We don't have a law enforcement agency that viciously discriminates against marginalized groups of people, and we certainly don't have a prison industrial complex that desecrates our psychological well-being. And when Black people are speaking about how quote-unquote unprofessional it is to behave in such a way in front of a group of people that have a higher social status, what they're really displaying is a sign of submission and subservience to people who mentally still hold the chains of freedom to their mind. Now, this isn't the typical soapbox speech that I'm sure some of you have made this assumption that I'm going to, so just hear me out before jumping to conclusions. If Black people are really a free group of people, this spectacle that occurred would not have a discussion surrounding it about the level of professionalism during that night. It's understandable that two conversations would take place about where fault should be placed, but nowhere should a conversation be constituted for one's sophistication if we claim to move unapologetically and value who we are. It speaks to our philosophy in regards to if we desperately desire to obtain other people's acceptance of our forced assimilation, and we constantly engage in dialogue about how we could care less about what other people think of us, but when the time comes for us to prove those sentiments, we develop selective memory and forget about those statements the moment the situation manifests. And in response to this meaningless concern, I say, what are you so afraid of? Why would you feel as though they think you're threatening when they're going to believe the negative stereotypes and connotations / misconduct about you regardless? And a perfect example of that is the case of Philando Castile when he obeyed commands and complied with the officer's orders, yet the officer still decided to play judge, jury, and executioner, ending that young man's life because he thought he had a concealed weapon. And the larger society has ultimately mastered psychology, and by proxy, they have mastered the art of manipulation, which, when used in conjunction, is an unfortunate combination for anyone not prone to its prowess. Now, this may go over the head of numerous people, but stop looking for their acceptance. You can sit there poised, quiet, and even be overly obedient, but it ultimately amounts to nothing if they already have negative judgments about your people reserved in the confines of their mind. Now, again, before any of you make assumptions or bombard me with your preconceived notions, I don't condone violence unless it's necessary, meaning that someone is approaching you from a combative stance, whether that be verbal or physical. An example of this, someone making derogatory statements about you on a consecutive basis, or potentially speaking about bringing harm to you. If you made it clear that it makes you uncomfortable and you've tried numerous approaches, such as ignoring it or that whole BS sticks and stones idiom that's ancient and antiquated, you'll eventually take a different recourse. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. And honestly, you guys, there's so much to discuss here. We can even include the notion that the industry is generally complicit in misogynoir when it comes to Black women. If this joke was directed toward any other gender or race of people, then those words never would have been spoken. But the reason why I say this situation is riddled with misogynoir is because generally Black women are easy targets for Black men. Chris Rock didn't make mention of Meryl Streep or Julia Roberts because he understood well the assignment that you don't make fun of them, but you are allowed to make fun of your own. And what I find to be the ultimate oxymoron is that Chris Rock created a documentary about Black hair, and he highlighted some of the misconceptions and stigma surrounding Black hair, but then years later he decides to completely throw that concern out the door in favor of appeasing some comedian from the larger society. Now, we can finally get to the point of this video. There's an article I'll read, and it isn't extremely long, but it's interesting. So it starts off by saying that American comedian Kevin T. Porter has taken credit for Chris Rock's joke about Jada Pinkett Smith that got him whacked by Will Smith. Smith has been the most talked about actor from the 94th Academy Awards, which took place last night, March the 27th, and it's not because of his winning of the Best Actor or Oscar. The Men in Black star took to the stage prior to accepting his award to hit at Rock in the face after the presenter made a joke about Pinkett Smith's shaved head. However, while Oscars viewers have been left divided over whether the hit was real or staged, Porter has taken to Twitter to claim that he wrote that silly Chris Rock Will Smith slap bit, proving that it was in fact a skit. Now, I find it extremely disturbing that Chris Rock allowed this man from outside of his community to come in and create this kamikaze of events, and even more disconcerting is the fact that he couldn't have used his own deductive reasoning or logic to understand that this may not have been a good idea. And from my understanding, Jada has been open about this condition. It was public knowledge, so I don't know if I necessarily believe the trope about him being ignorant to this revelation, but I will say it's part of the reason why I don't conduct business or have minimal involvement with a larger society, because if they are an expert at anything, it's their innate ability to divide and conquer. This trait appears to be instinctive because when they come into contact with our community, they understand how we will do anything to get in their good graces. And this mechanism is exploited and manipulated to their advantage if it means that we can be at odds with one another. And I see them coming from a mile away and immediately will exercise caution because I understand how vile their intentions are, but they do a great job at creating a facade to lower your guard so they can prey upon your trust to begin their process of infiltration. And again, I will say, there is no way this man should have been able to quietly sneak into our community and cause this level of discord because of how remedial Chris Rock's logic functions. And I find it ironic, the double standard when it comes to how this would play out in the larger society's community, because if a joke had been made about them, they would have used the powers of their social status to end that person's career, but it's okay since it's our community. The joke at someone's expense is completely fine. And that was sarcasm for those who don't know. Now, getting back to this article, I don't think this was funny one bit. I think it was in terrible taste, and he could have joked about anything. It could have been about COVID, the state of the world, but he instead instead chose to zero in on one person and make light of their appearance without any thought to how she would feel after the fact. And some may say we're being too sensitive. Well, that's because we have a right to be sensitive. You wouldn't tolerate disrespect of your children, your wife, your mother, so what is it that makes this acceptable? Just because you don't know her personally doesn't excuse this action at all. Those jokes are not funny, and if you can't host a space to make people laugh without doing it at someone's expense, perhaps try your hand in another industry, because that brand of comedy simply isn't funny. Words, no matter the format or implications they come in, have the potential to manifest into physical arrows that pierce the self-esteem of other people. And that's why we need to stop being dismissive of that fact. Words are powerful, and they've even claimed the lives of students that were the target of bullying. It's not essential for us to understand the pathology of the larger society in this case, because a majority of their purpose in our community is to create division and deception. So the article goes on to say, commenting on how Ariana won an Oscar but gave a Tony speech and how Kenneth Branagh is almost Ewan McGregor, Porter tweeted, "The real last duel is Chris versus Will." In a later tweet, the comedian claimed, "Hey, I wrote that silly Chris Rock Will Smith slap bit. We knew we'd push some buttons, but comedy is meant to provoke and make people think. I'm proud we did both those things tonight at #Oscars2022. However, the comedian has received backlash from followers for his comment. I have to say that the admission from this comedian is alarming. He appears to express excitement and joy from the fact that he sabotaged what was supposed to be a proud moment for Will Smith. He says we push buttons, but comedy is meant to provoke and make people think, and even he's proud that he thinks that his mission was accomplished. So what I gather from this is, behind this code of language, you deliberately wanted to create contention during a time when honor and appreciation were supposed to be present. My thing is, if you wanted to watch a physical altercation, turn the channel to WWF or the UFC, but your blatant disregard for the legacy of two people being tarnished is something that's demented, sick, and twisted. Comedy shouldn't push buttons. It should be enjoyable for everyone without compromising the integrity of an individual. And I've said this before, you guys, in previous videos, but this is one of the thousands of reasons why I think Black people being in the midst of the larger society is problematic to our existence. How can we expect to unite without interference, or at least have the conversations to talk about our differences and what we can do to come to common ground? Their role in our community is to ensure harmony is never meant to come to fruition, and it sickens me that we fall for the bait every time, all because we wish to satisfy and appease the ones who benefit from your anguish. And rightfully so, he did receive backlash for his participation in the scheme because it was destructive and deplorable. But I'm just going to finish this article and read some of these other replies because there were a lot of tweets from this. So one person wrote, "One noted, provocative, making fun of health conditions of people. Man, that wasn't funny at all." Another person wrote, "Oh my God, she's bald. Like seriously, that's all it is. She's bald. You can't take one joke about being bald. I mean, come on," another argued. Someone else said, "Dude, comedy is not humiliation. You both don't know how bad it affects Jada, her condition. But I'm against violence, and Will Smith did not have to slap Chris Rock." Porter's supposed admission that the joke was his, despite being called out by some as distasteful, would align with some viewers' theory that the slap was staged. The clip was slowed down by one user to focus on Chris Rock's face, which appeared to supposedly be grimacing for what he knows is coming. However, others have continued to argue that it is real, and the crowd's reaction to the hit, Smith's apology while accepting his reward, and reflection on Denzel Washington's words of advice would appear to prove the altercation would have been very real. That's the end of that article. Now, some people genuinely felt sympathy for Jada because, again, women already are very sensitive about how the world perceives them, which is why you need to be mindful of what you say. It was inappropriate, and the look on Jada's face after he said that, you could tell that she tried to slightly laugh, but she was visibly flustered and just frustrated, like, oh my God, again? And I think at that moment that Will realized how chastened Jada looked, he defended his wife using an alternate method because he was at this point beyond exasperated with the scrutiny and harsh criticisms. And instinctively, when you've exhausted every other attempt at resolving outside conflict and turmoil, you'll try something different, and more than likely, their family has been dealing with these comments for years and just hope people would stop talking, but it never ceased. And so Will made a massive physical statement because by this point, it became too much. And there's also been some back and forth regarding the authenticity of the ceremony. I actually believe it to be real because of the emotion behind it. Jada's facial expression alone suggests that she was unaware that she would be the target of Chris's banter. And why would Will jeopardize his Oscar and career for a skit or scene? And a few celebrities gave their thoughts on this and empathized with the actions taken by Will. And I'm thankful that Denzel Washington was there to console him. Something about a veteran in the game making sure that you're all right makes you feel way better and heartwarming that someone is in your corner. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and close this out and ask you guys this very serious question. So do you think it's way too easy to divide our community? The ones who are most upset and alienated by this occurrence were Black people, and I just see how some of us went out of our way to prove points to each other, but we failed to realize that there was an intruder who came in to cause this disruption, someone from outside our community. So weigh in below in the comment section, like, subscribe, and share this video, and I'll make sure to see you guys in the next one.